I'm Heather, and this is the Living with Addiction podcast, where I show you how you have more power than you realize when it comes to helping yourself and your child that's struggling with addiction. Hey, everybody. Hope you're having a great Thursday or whatever day you're listening. Before I get started on the podcast today, I want to let you know that you can reach out to me if you have any questions about anything that you hear on the podcast. You can message me on Instagram or on Facebook. I'm at Heather Ross Coaching on both of those. Or you can email me, heather@heatherrosscoaching.com. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have if you reach out to me. But last week, I talked about processing and feeling your emotions and how important it is. Because if we go through life numb and we don't feel anything, then we never really get to know ourselves. And at a very high level, our feelings are clear signals of what is right and wrong to us and our likes and dislikes. We can't be in touch with ourselves or know what's most important to us if we can't feel it emotionally. So, this week, I want to share with you how we avoid our feelings and why it's a problem. Avoiding emotions, and I'm using feelings and emotions interchangeably here. Avoiding emotions involves the concept of buffering. And for me, that concept really took a lot of the emotional charge out of addiction. So I want to share that with you today for that reason as well. But don't just listen for your child in that aspect. Listen for yourself and how you can use this to create what you want in your life, because that's really what this podcast is about. I'm sharing information to help you create what you want in your life. That's where all the magic is. And buffering is when we use external things to change how we feel emotionally, but there's a net negative consequence. If there's no negative consequence, then it's not buffering. It's not a problem. But that's usually not the case if you aren't being intentional. Buffering is something we do that keeps us from truly experiencing our lives. It helps us hide from reality, helps us procrastinate, and to avoid feeling uncomfortable situations. And humans are wired to avoid pain, so this is just natural for us, and that's why we have to be intentional about it. We don't want to face the uncomfortable so-called negative emotions because we don't understand them and they're uncomfortable. We want pleasure and happiness, or possibly even like me, numbness all the time, like how I used to be. But we're bombarded with signals that we need to eat something, buy something, watch a show or movie, go somewhere, take a trip. We're wired to seek pleasure in life, but when it comes to concentrated pleasure like sugar, alcohol, and drugs, we're just wired to want more. Pleasure makes us want more pleasure. We get a big dopamine hit from it and it feels good, so of course we want more. But when we give up false pleasures, we have more availability to experience the real pleasures in life. Maybe you don't even know what your real pleasures are, like what really lights you up inside. And if you're one of those people who doesn't have any hobbies, doesn't have time for self care, doesn't even think about what you like, let alone know, then chances are that you've been codependent and or buffering. In my case, it was definitely both. I was people pleasing, codependent, and buffering away most of my feelings until I mainly just felt numb. Numb was my comfort zone. It wasn't until I started constraining from things I'd been using as a buffer that I figured out what I truly enjoyed in life and what made me happy. Like, think about, do you really know what you want in life? Not what you want for your family or anybody else, just for you. I didn't know what I wanted just for me. And I know that there's a lot of other people who don't as well. And not having that baseline of knowing what we want really leaves us susceptible to other people telling us what we want. Or we just do the things that the people that we love enjoy doing instead of figuring out what we love to do. It's just easier. And most advertisements tell us we can purchase happiness, right? But do we feel happier, or is our brain just being tricked into feeling happier? Plus, we know that when we do that, that happiness just doesn't last. Like, how long does the high from buying a new purse or the high from buying a new car last? Like, how long is it before that wears off? Do we want to put together a bunch of false pleasures and call that happiness? Or do we want to find a way to cultivate happiness without them? Usually, when we remove those false pleasures or buffers, we're left with feeling emotions. And think about for a minute what you would be like if you didn't overeat, didn't overdrink, overspend, overwork, over people please, over Netflix, over Facebook. Like, what would life be like if you didn't seek all of those false pleasures and just went for a true, honest, authentic life? Like, are you willing to live without any false pleasures or pretend emotions? And I know sometimes that's a hard decision to make. I had started doing it in my life unintentionally before I even came across this concept of buffering and started being more intentional about it. And it's not that we should never do any of the things I've mentioned, but overdoing them and over avoiding feelings, it comes with consequences. Buffering does cause pain and it does have consequences. Like overeating equals being overweight and feeling yucky and sick to your stomach from overeating. Overspending results in debt and financial stress. Overdrinking results in hangovers and all kinds of other consequences. Over people pleasing, that results in your needs not being met because you're putting everybody else's needs above yours. Overworking results in no work-life balance. Over Facebooking or TV watching results in procrastinating and not getting things done. It just doesn't feel good. The consequence that all of these have in common, though, is they keep you from feeling your feelings and figuring out what you truly want, what truly makes you authentically happy. And when it comes to the self-coaching model, buffering is an action. I talked about the self-coaching model in episode 16. So if you haven't listened to that, this might not make sense. So go back and listen to that episode 16 to understand the self-coaching model. But as I said, in that model, buffering is an action. And I just want to give you an example of my model about my daughter's addiction before I found coaching and how buffering played a big part in that. So the circumstance, which is just a fact, was that my daughter was diagnosed with substance use disorder. And my thought about that was, I don't know how to help her. And my feeling was, I felt a lot of despair. And my actions were to buffer with overworking, which meant I was staying at the office until late every night so I didn't have to face what was happening at home. When I was home, I was sitting in a dark room watching TV. I was isolating from most of my friends, keeping what was going on in my life a secret. definitely thinking that I could not feel better until my daughter was sober. I was focused on fixing her, and I was just pushing down any emotions that came up. I was very sedentary, just eating junk instead of healthy meals. And the result of that was I didn't help myself, so I couldn't help or support anybody else. And you can see in that model, it's very externally focused. I was focusing on things outside of myself and neglecting myself. And problems just can't be solved that way. We're always powerless when we're focused externally. So here's an example of what my model was about my daughter's addiction after I found coaching and became intentional about giving up buffers and figuring out what I loved in life. Again, the circumstance was the same. The fact was that my daughter was diagnosed with substance use disorder. My thought about that was focusing on my daughter isn't working. I'm ready to focus on me. And my feeling was committed. I was committed to myself. And my actions were to strive for work life balance, constrain from watching TV, spending time with friends, using the self coaching model to learn to create a mind body connection and really feel my emotions, research and try new things until I figured out what I like doing for myself, stop people pleasing, step outside of my daughter's addiction instead of being in the middle of it, work out, plan and prepare healthy meals, and live the life that I wanted my daughter to live. And the result was I focused on committing to myself. And in this model, I was focused internally. And that's why my life started transforming at that time. And feeling my own feelings was such a huge part of that. So, when you take away the buffers and pursue well being, you go through some discomfort because you're not used to feeling feelings. But everything that you want is on the other side of that discomfort. And when I became really intentional with how I was living and paying attention to ways I was buffering, I made a lot of changes to my diet. But by that point, I had given up drinking years ago, just because I didn't want to drink anymore. I didn't really know about buffering. It wasn't very intentional. I just um, had decided I didn't want to do it anymore. So I was no longer working in an office and I hadn't started coaching yet, like working as a coach. So I couldn't buffer with work anymore. I'd given up overspending several years before that as well. So overeating or eating foods that didn't serve me was really my last buffer. And that had a net negative consequence for me. So when I started intentionally constraining my eating and cutting out sugar and flour, something really surprising happened, which was for the first time in years, I started really craving alcohol. Like I really wanted a drink. And that was just not something I had experienced in years. And we had this refrigerator on our back porch where we kept any alcohol that we had. It was mostly leftover from pool party stuff that people had brought with them and just left at our house. But I was standing out there in front of the refrigerator with the door open, staring in there, like looking for a drink. And I didn't drink. And I was like, what the hell am I doing out here? And I realized that I just wanted to trade buffers. I didn't want to feel the discomfort. I wanted something to help me avoid the discomfort of feeling the things that were coming up, because I had dropped pretty much all of my false pleasures at that point. And it was such an eye-opening moment because I didn't really actually want a drink. I didn't want the alcohol. And I never wanted whatever it was that I was eating that wasn't good for me when I wasn't hungry. Really didn't want to be at work at 10 o'clock at night when I was overworking. I didn't want to be spending money on things that I didn't want when I was doing that. What I wanted was to avoid discomfort because that's what I've been doing for most of my adult life. I didn't realize what was on the other side of that discomfort was figuring out like who I really was as a person. I mean, in my 20s, 30s, and 40s, I did drink quite a bit, but I never really had any consequences other than hangovers and, occasionally regretting my behavior. But I also, as a result of that, didn't know how to feel my emotions and didn't know what I liked to do other than activities that revolved around drinking. And the last two of those consequences aren't really what we think about when we think about drinking related consequences. But in my opinion, they're some of the most dangerous consequences because looking back, I can see how there's so many things in my life that I accepted because I didn't ever feel the emotions that would have signaled those things were unacceptable to me. And when I learned about buffering, I started thinking about how if I had to drink or eat or shop or hide out in my office to tolerate some part of my life, maybe I should look at creating experiences that I could enjoy without some type of buffering. So, the understanding of buffering and feelings gave me the wake up call to pursue my own desires, feel my feelings, and it gave me so much compassion for my daughter. And it really changed how I view her addiction. And I'm sharing this because, as I've said so many times, like, it doesn't matter how hard we try to relate to our kids. If we're in all out resistance of their addiction and our body language and energy is just screaming that resistance, it doesn't matter what we say to try to relate to them. We're not going to get through to them. And so this is one of those things, this going through this process, and I actually shared it with my daughter, going through this process of really inventorying myself and how I had buffered in my life, and then the compassion that it brought up for her and sharing that with her was actually one of the early turning points in our relationship of going from her really hating me and not wanting anything to do with me to starting to open up to me again. So, at a high level, our kids who are abusing drugs and alcohol, they're just doing the same things that we do when we buffer. They just want to avoid the discomfort of how they feel, and the way they're doing it has a net negative consequence. Think about when you're on a diet and you decide not to eat any cookies. Do you have a rough day? You want relief from the discomfort of that day. Next thing you know, you break your commitment to yourself. You're standing in the pantry eating a cookie. If it was for me, it'd be a cannoli. Now, imagine if everyone who found out about it lost faith in you, thought you were weak, judged you, maybe even said, like, you can't be in my life because you ate that cookie. Now, that gave me a lot of compassion for my daughter. And it was the first time that I saw how much we were alike instead of how different we were. And I thought, like, how lucky am I that I'm just too scared to try drugs? And the ways that I buffer are socially acceptable. So nobody ever says to me, you can't be in my life because you work too late or you ate something you told me you weren't going to eat. Now, don't misconstrue my compassion or the cookie story. I know there's a huge difference between a cookie and heroin, And just because I have a lot of compassion doesn't mean I don't have boundaries. But I just want you to think about this. We're all just humans with feelings we don't understand. We don't like a lot of our feelings because they have a bad reputation and make everyone uncomfortable. So we do all kinds of crazy things to avoid them. But when you just keep it simple and take out all of the stories about your child's addiction and all of the pain you've attached to it, it really is simple. It's just a human who's in pain and trying to avoid it. So I really urge you to think about that perspective I just offered, because if you're struggling with a lot of judgments about your child's addiction or anyone else's, it really helps to find the similarities and let go of the differences. Think about how you buffer and if it's really serving you. What could be on the other side of those false pleasures for you? When you take away the buffers and you allow yourself to really feel your emotions and pursue well being, like you get to know yourself, trust yourself, and like yourself. Well, eventually. It depends on the degree to which you've been buffering that you might not like what you see at first, but it does get better. I went through it and now I like what I see more and more every day. But when you take away the buffers, you can get to the root cause of your unhappiness. So you can change it instead of using something to help you forget about it and ignore it. Trust me, it's way more powerful to change it. Then you get to experience natural pleasures, things that really light you up inside and make you truly happy. It just blows my mind to think if I didn't stop buffering and start feeling my feelings, I wouldn't have known how fulfilling it is to get to help my clients. I mean, some of the people that I work with are in their darkest moments, and I get the gift of helping them through that. I'd still be hiding at work and feeling numb if I hadn't stopped buffering. I mean, look at the differences. Hiding from life and my feelings in an office late at night, or getting the fulfillment of truly helping people change their lives. Like, I would have never learned that I was capable of starting my own business, that I love crystals and energy healing and painting and essential oils, planting flowers, how fascinated I am by birds. And I would have never cultivated the really deep friendships I have today if I was still buffering. And before I wrap this up, I just want to be clear. I'm not saying having a drink here or there is buffering. I'm not saying watching a TV show or shopping for fun is buffering, because you know the difference. If you're sitting on the couch, watching TV, surfing the internet, eating some cake, and drinking a glass of wine, and you still feel bored and dissatisfied, then you're buffering. You know what that feels like. It's time to turn the TV and phone off, throw away the cake and wine, and see what feelings come up for you. Figure out what feeds your soul. On the other hand, if you're doing that and your soul is happy and you're giddy about it, then enjoy yourself. I mean, that's the difference. Buffering on false pleasures is looking for external satisfaction, but it doesn't work. Just like the external focus of relying on your child to get sober so you can feel better doesn't work. External focus leads to external dependence, just like our kids' external dependence on drugs. It leaves us powerless. When you look inside yourself for answers, you can hear what your emotions are telling you. You can learn your true desires and create well-being, and that's where all your power is. So that's all I have for you this week. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and I'll be back next week. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want to learn more about my work, go to heatherrosscoaching.com. If you want to help other parents who are struggling with a child's addiction, you can do it 2 different ways. First, you can share the podcast with them directly, or you can share it on your social media. Second, you can leave a review. Talk to you next week.